Welcome to this gentle journey through Fallout 76. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you are watching from tonight, and if you enjoy these relaxing explorations, consider subscribing so you never miss the next one. When Fallout 76 was first announced, it immediately sparked both excitement and confusion. This was the first time Bethesda had tried to take the series fully online, transforming what had always been a single player wasteland into a shared world survival experience. At its heart, the game placed players in West Virginia, a region that had never been explored before in the Fallout timeline. Bethesda chose this location deliberately because West Virginia is rich with folklore, mysterious creatures, and haunting Appalachian landscapes. From the very beginning, one of the central promises of Fallout 76 was that it would lean into local myth while keeping the post apocalyptic tone. The opening premise sets the stage. Players awaken in Vault 76, one of the very first vaults to open after the Great War. The number itself was not chosen randomly. Bethesda tied it to American history, since 1776 was the year of the Declaration of Independence. By linking the vault to that date, the game symbolically places players at the dawn of a new world, tasked with rebuilding civilization. The vault was meant to be one of the control vaults, not filled with cruel experiments like so many others, and so its dwellers were intended to be the very first to reclaim the surface. That bit of lore creates a sense of hope at the start, even if the wasteland itself quickly proves how hostile it has become. The map of West Virginia was by far the largest environment Bethesda had built up to that point. It was divided into 6 distinct regions, each with its own atmosphere and difficulty. The forest, with its relatively green and welcoming landscape, was meant to ease players into exploration. Savage Divide was harsher, filled with tougher enemies and rugged mountains. The Mire was haunting, full of swampy areas and creeping shadows. The Ash Heap captured the industrial scars of coal country, its skies blackened with soot. Cranberry Bog gave the world an otherworldly red hue, and finally, the Toxic Valley stood out with its deadly white chemical wastelands. Each region was designed to reflect both the diversity of West Virginia and the themes of Fallout beauty, mixed with devastation. One of the most obscure design choices was the use of real-world landmarks as in-game locations. Fallout 76 brought in the Greenbrier Resort, which was famous in real life for having once housed a secret congressional bunker during the Cold War. It also introduced the Mothman Museum, a real roadside attraction in Point Pleasant that celebrates one of West Virginia's strangest cryptids. By blending these real places with Fallout's alternate history, Bethesda created a sense of uncanny familiarity. Players who lived in West Virginia or visited the state often reported that they recognized roads, buildings, and natural landmarks in uncanny detail. The Mothman itself became one of the most famous creatures in Fallout 76. Unlike the super mutants, ghouls, or deathclaws that players already knew, the Mothman had no prior presence in the series. Its design leaned directly into the folklore of the state, with glowing red eyes and haunting wings. Encounters with the Mothman were rare, and sometimes it simply observed players silently before disappearing, making it as much a mystery as a monster. This obscurity made it legendary, as fans debated what its appearances meant and whether it tied into larger lore. Other Appalachian legends, like the Flatwoods Monster and the Grafton Monster, were also included, enriching the sense that this wasteland was haunted by its own unique myths. When Fallout 76 launched, one of the most controversial design choices was that it had no human non-player characters at all. Bethesda's intention was that every human the player encountered would be another real player. This was meant to emphasize the idea of rebuilding civilization with actual people rather than scripted characters. However, the absence of traditional NPCs made the world feel emptier than fans expected. Terminals, holotapes, and robots carried much of the story, but many players missed the conversations, quests, and companionship that had always been a staple of Fallout. This obscurity in design was fascinating because it revealed how much personality NPCs bring to the wasteland, and it became one of the main things Bethesda later changed with updates. The Wastelanders expansion eventually addressed this criticism by adding back human characters with dialogue trees, moral choices, and factions to align with. When it released, players could once again experience that familiar Fallout style of decision making, whether siding with raiders or settlers. This expansion transformed how the game felt, almost like it had relaunched as a hybrid of online survival and traditional Fallout storytelling. In hindsight, this correction shows just how much player feedback shaped Fallout 76 over time. Another obscure element of the game's lore involves Vault 76's purpose. Unlike many vaults, which hid sinister experiments, this vault was explicitly a control vault, meant to release its dwellers exactly 25 years after the bombs fell. This ties into the timeline, as Fallout 76 is officially set in the year 2102, making it the earliest Fallout game chronologically. That places it over 160 years before Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. For longtime fans of the series, this meant that Fallout 76 was a rare opportunity to see the wasteland in its infancy, closer to the immediate aftermath of nuclear war. Buildings were less collapsed, forests still had color, and ruins felt fresher than the dustier, more decayed settings of later games. Player interactions were another layer of obscurity. Because the game was online, Bethesda implemented systems to prevent griefing, such as requiring mutual combat before PvP could truly escalate. But players quickly found creative ways to work around these restrictions, sometimes using environmental damage or luring enemies into combat zones to provoke fights. This created a kind of emergent storytelling where the unpredictability of human behavior replaced scripted NPC interactions. Some groups formed settlements with open shops, while others became infamous raiders who hunted fellow players. These social dynamics, while not planned in the same way as traditional quests, became part of the fabric of Fallout 76's unique identity. The economy of Fallout 76 also introduced obscurities. Players scavenged not only caps, but also various crafting materials, since the new survival mechanics required constant upkeep of weapons, armor, and bases. The camp system allowed players to build homes almost anywhere in the world, turning the wasteland into a canvas for creativity. Camps could be elaborate mansions, cozy cabins, or strange art projects made of scavenged junk. The obscurity here lies in how much the camp system reshaped Fallout gameplay. It was as much about expressing identity as it was about surviving. Even technical struggles became part of Fallout 76's legacy. At launch, the game was riddled with bugs and glitches, some of which became infamous online. Players encountered enemies stuck in walls, bizarre physics collisions, and items that duplicated unexpectedly. While these flaws caused frustration, they also produced humorous moments and stories that spread across the community. Over time, patches improved stability, but the memory of its rocky start remains one of the most obscure yet defining aspects of the game's history. Fallout 76 is, in many ways, a game about reinvention. Its very premise leaving Vault 76 to rebuild the world mirrors Bethesda's attempt to reinvent how Fallout could be played. Some of its experiments failed, others succeeded, but together they created a unique entry in the series. The obscurities of its launch, its Appalachian myths, its giant map, and its player driven world form the foundation of a game that continues to evolve. The origins of Fallout 76 trace back further than most fans realize. In the early 2010s, Bethesda experimented with multiplayer ideas inside Fallout 4's engine. Internally, the project was known as Project Charleston, a name chosen because the capital of West Virginia is Charleston and because the developers knew from the beginning that this setting would become the foundation of the game. The decision to lean into West Virginia was not simply a matter of geography, it was tied to a desire to use real folklore as a backbone for the game's bestiary and atmosphere. One of the first design documents highlighted how West Virginia's history with coal mining and industry could blend naturally into Fallout's retro futuristic alternate timeline. Abandoned mines, collapsing company towns, and polluted valleys already told stories of hardship even without a nuclear war. When placed inside Fallout's universe, these landscapes became perfect backdrops for ruined factories, scorched earth, and eerie ash choked skies. This is how the Ash Heap region was born, an entire area built around West Virginia's coal country identity. The developers also researched Appalachian folklore extensively, more than they had for any prior Fallout game. They wanted to populate the world with creatures that would feel unique and unsettling, yet grounded in real legend. The Mothman, of course, became the headliner, but others like the Flatwoods Monster, the Wendigo, and the Grafton Monster were deliberately chosen to give players experiences that could not happen in Washington, D.C. or Boston. The Wendigo, in particular, was designed as a nightmare fuel monster, spindly, emaciated, with a horrifying scream emphasizing hunger and fear. This was one of the first times Bethesda leaned so heavily into horror for a Fallout creature, an obscurity that made Appalachia stand out among wastelands. From a technical standpoint, Fallout 76 was built on the same creation engine that powered Fallout 4, but it required major overhauls to handle multiplayer. Networking code, server stability, and player synchronization had to be developed essentially from scratch. Todd Howard later admitted that the studio underestimated how difficult this would be. One obscure detail is that the developers often tested the servers by filling the game world with nothing but cows, herds of Brahmin roaming everywhere, because they wanted to stress test how NPC pathing would sync across different players. Early testers recalled entire valleys filled with Brahmin that lagged the servers into near collapse, a funny but telling example of how experimental the process was. Because this was the first online Fallout, Bethesda had to create new rules for PvP. They introduced a system where players could not be killed in one shot unless they agreed to fight back, a mechanic meant to discourage griefing. Yet, even in testing, developers noted that players would find ways to trick each other using environmental damage or baiting enemies to start combat indirectly. These observations revealed how unpredictable online play could be, and they became part of what shaped Fallout 76's launch identity. The story's structure was another experiment. Without human NPCs at launch, the world needed to tell its tales through terminals, robots, and holotapes. The design team thought this would encourage players to pay closer attention to environmental storytelling, but in practice, many felt the absence of human interaction left the wasteland feeling hollow. One obscure piece of trivia is that several voice actors recorded lines for human characters before they were ultimately cut from the launch version. These recordings were shelved and later repurposed for the Wastelanders update, which explains why some NPCs sound fully integrated despite being new content. The music of Fallout 76 also carried obscurities. Bethesda licensed Appalachian folk songs alongside the usual retro tunes, blending local culture with Fallout's classic radio stations. The song Take Me Home, Country Roads by John Denver became the anthem of the game, even used in its reveal trailer. In fact, a special cover version was recorded specifically for Fallout 76, and it climbed music charts after the trailer debuted, becoming one of the rare times a video game announcement directly influenced pop culture radio play. The obscurity here is that the version used in the game was not John Denver's, but a commissioned cover that gained its own fame. Environmental design reveals another layer of hidden history. The developers recreated real world landmarks like the New River Gorge Bridge, one of the longest arch bridges in the world. In Fallout 76, it becomes a rusting, crumbling highway where players often build camps or encounter enemies. Similarly, Camden Park, a real amusement park, was reimagined as a decaying carnival with mascot characters turned into eerie robots. These inclusions are both homage and satire, using real places to anchor the absurdity of Fallout's post nuclear vision. During development, Bethesda also wanted to explore the theme of rebuilding more directly than in past games. That is why the camp system was such a priority. It allowed every player to act as a settler, creating bases that could be moved around the map. Obscure design notes revealed that the original plan was for camps to be permanent, locked into chosen plots of land, but testing showed that griefers would constantly block resources. The eventual solution was to allow camps to be redeployed freely, giving players flexibility and reducing frustration. This decision ultimately defined how player creativity shaped the Appalachian wasteland. The game's beta, known as the Break It Early Test Application, or BETA, offered glimpses into these mechanics. Players noticed immediately that while the world was beautiful, bugs and performance issues were rampant. Entire quests failed to trigger, enemies froze mid animation, and server disconnects were frequent. One obscure but amusing bug caused players to spawn as giant stretched out versions of themselves, their limbs extending unnaturally across the screen. These glitches became memes almost overnight, setting the tone for the game's controversial launch. Still, the foundation of Appalachia was solid in terms of ambition. The largest map Bethesda had ever built, filled with folklore creatures, real world landmarks, and dynamic player built structures, was unlike anything the studio had attempted before. Even if execution stumbled at launch, the obscurities behind its creation reveal just how experimental Fallout 76 truly was. It was not just another entry in the series, it was an attempt to redefine what Fallout could mean in an online age. When Fallout 76 finally launched in November of 2018, it did so under a storm of anticipation and skepticism. The series had never gone online in such a direct way before, and many fans were unsure whether Bethesda could capture the feeling of a Fallout wasteland while making it into a multiplayer experience. The release version revealed a game that was ambitious, but also deeply unstable, with technical issues that immediately became part of its identity. Players discovered bugs at almost every turn. Enemies would sometimes freeze in place or become invincible, refusing to register damage. Quests would fail to trigger properly, forcing players to restart or abandon progress. Servers disconnected often, and inventory items sometimes vanished without explanation. These problems frustrated players, but also created a culture of humor as screenshots and videos of bizarre glitches flooded online forums. One of the most infamous early bugs caused characters to stretch out into unnatural shapes, their limbs twisting across the landscape. Though unintentional, these distortions added to the surreal feeling of Appalachia, almost as if the wasteland itself were bending reality. The absence of human non player characters at launch became one of the most controversial aspects. Bethesda had marketed this as a design choice that would emphasize human players rebuilding the world together. However, many fans quickly realized that without traditional NPCs, the game felt empty. Holotapes and robots carried the bulk of storytelling, but the lack of conversations and branching dialogue made Appalachia feel lonely in a way that was not satisfying. Critics noted that while Fallout was always about solitude, it was also about characters, and this version had stripped much of that away. Despite the problems, the community found ways to embrace the strangeness. Some players roleplayed as shopkeepers, using the camp system to set up storefronts where others could trade supplies. Others formed raider gangs, roaming the wasteland to cause chaos for unsuspecting wanderers. A few even acted as guides for new players, taking on the role of friendly wasteland sheriffs. These emergent behaviors became part of the hidden charm of Fallout 76, proving that even in a broken world, people could create stories of their own. The launch was also surrounded by controversy outside of the game itself. Bethesda sold a Power Armor edition of Fallout 76 that promised a canvas duffel bag as part of its collector package. When the bags shipped, players discovered they were made of cheap nylon instead. This sparked outrage, as fans felt deceived by misleading advertising. The incident became so widely discussed that Bethesda eventually offered replacements, but the damage to the game's reputation was already done. This obscure controversy remains one of the most infamous launch missteps in modern gaming. Another strange chapter involved the game's refund policy. Some players who purchased Fallout 76 digitally tried to request refunds, citing its broken state. Reports surfaced that Bethesda was refusing many of these requests, which fueled frustration and added to the growing perception that the game had been mishandled. These disputes spread across social media, further shaping the narrative that Fallout 76 was a troubled experiment. Even in this chaotic launch, there were moments of beauty. The landscape of Appalachia, with its autumn forests, misty mountains, and eerie ruins, drew praise even from critics who disliked the gameplay. Many noted that wandering alone through the toxic valley or standing at the edge of the cranberry bog could feel haunting and immersive, a reminder of what Fallout was capable of at its best. The world itself became the highlight, an achievement overshadowed by technical flaws, but appreciated by those who stopped to explore quietly. Updates began to roll out quickly, each one fixing hundreds of bugs and trying to stabilize the servers. Bethesda committed publicly to supporting the game long term, insisting that it would improve over time. This slow rebuilding process mirrored the theme of Fallout itself, a broken wasteland gradually stitched back together. For players who stayed, each patch brought new features, events, and opportunities. The obscurity of this period is that the game's community was divided. Many abandoned it entirely, but those who remained formed a tight knit group that carried Fallout 76 forward through its darkest days. Modding also became a point of discussion. Fallout has always thrived on mod communities, but because Fallout 76 was online, Bethesda restricted mods to avoid exploits and cheating. This created tension, as fans who had enjoyed creating and downloading mods for Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 felt limited. Some unofficial tools still circulated, adding visual tweaks or quality of life adjustments, but official support remained minimal. This obscurity highlighted how different Fallout 76 was compared to its predecessors, where modding had been celebrated. Critics at launch largely reviewed the game poorly, with scores that were among the lowest in Bethesda's history. Yet, even within the harsh reviews, there were acknowledgments that the idea behind the game was bold. Few studios would attempt to take a beloved single player series and transform it into an online survival experience. That ambition itself became part of Fallout 76's identity. It was not a failure of creativity, but a failure of execution, and the difference mattered to many fans who hoped it could still grow into something greater. Looking back, the launch of Fallout 76 is remembered less as the end of the series and more as a rocky starting point for an evolving experiment. The obscurities of its first months, glitched enemies, stretched characters, missing duffel bags, denied refunds, and player made settlements form a tapestry of chaos that has rarely been matched in gaming. Yet, even in this chaos, there was something strangely fitting. Fallout has always been about surviving in a broken world, and in a way, its players live that story both inside and outside the game. The months following the release of Fallout 76 were marked by patches, hotfixes, and promises. Bethesda had staked its reputation on the idea that the game would not remain static. Just as the dwellers of Vault 76 were sent out to rebuild civilization, the developers themselves had to rebuild their creation piece by piece. Over time, updates transformed the wasteland, gradually shifting it closer to what fans expected from a Fallout title. The most important of these updates was Wastelanders, released in April of 2020. This expansion fundamentally changed the identity of Fallout 76 by introducing human non-player characters back into the world. For the first time, Appalachia felt alive with settlers, raiders, and wanderers who could be spoken to, bargained with, and fought against. Bethesda framed this update as a turning point, and for many players, it truly was. The empty feeling of wandering a world filled only with robots and holotapes gave way to conversations, branching dialogue, and meaningful choices. In this sense, Wastelanders was less of an update and more of a relaunch. The expansion also introduced factions, a familiar staple of Fallout that had been missing at launch. Players could align themselves with raiders at Crater or settlers at Foundation, each with its own quest lines, rewards, and moral decisions. The presence of these groups reintroduced the classic Fallout tension between survival, ideology, and self-interest. Choosing which faction to side with became one of the most meaningful decisions in the game, restoring a sense of role-playing that had long been absent. The obscurity here is that these factions were not simply cosmetic. They had their own personalities, voiced dialogue, and consequences that shaped how the world responded. Alongside human characters came companions, another feature players had begged for. Fallout 76 introduced allies who could be invited to a player's camp, providing both company and small gameplay benefits. These characters had backstories, unique dialogue, and sometimes even quest chains. Though limited compared to companions in Fallout 4, their presence nonetheless enriched the atmosphere of Appalachia. Many players developed attachments to these allies, proving how deeply Fallout fans value companionship, even in a game designed around multiplayer. After Wastelanders, Bethesda continued to expand the game's story with Steel Dawn in November of 2020 and Steel Rain in July of 2021. These updates brought the Brotherhood of Steel to Appalachia, connecting Fallout 76 more directly to the larger lore of the series. The Brotherhood's arrival was framed as both a blessing and a curse. They offered order and advanced technology, but their authoritarian tendencies clashed with the fragile communities trying to rebuild. This tension echoed the Brotherhood's presence in other Fallout titles, yet here it unfolded earlier in the timeline, showing the faction's influence centuries before later games. Steel Dawn, released in November 2020, introduced the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel and its leadership conflict. Steel Rain, released in July 2021, concluded the storyline and added new rewards and repeatable missions. Together, these updates established Appalachia not just as an isolated wasteland, but as a stage for the larger ideological battles that have defined Fallout since its beginnings. Obscure details in these expansions reveal how much Bethesda listened to community feedback. Many of the new NPCs reference the struggles of earlier Vault dwellers, acknowledging events from launch content. Dialogue sometimes poked fun at the absence of human characters in the past, almost as if the game itself were admitting its mistakes. In this way, Wastelanders and its successors functioned both as storytelling devices and as apologies. The world became fuller, not only with quests, but with self awareness. These updates also improved the gameplay loop significantly. New daily and weekly challenges encouraged exploration, events became more dynamic, and quality of life improvements reduced frustration. Fast travel was made more convenient, stash sizes increased, and new items expanded player creativity in camp building. The obscurity is that some of these changes were never heavily advertised, discovered only by those who kept playing consistently. In many ways, the game quietly evolved, with dozens of small tweaks reshaping its core identity. Another fascinating addition was the scoreboard system, introduced with seasonal content. Players could earn rewards by completing challenges, unlocking cosmetics, camp items, and other bonuses. This system echoed battle passes popular in other online games, but it was framed with Fallout themed visuals like S, C, O, R, E, ranks, and retro posters. The scoreboard brought structure to the game's long term grind, encouraging regular play while also deepening the sense of community as players compared their progress. Community events further enriched Appalachia after these updates. Fastnacht, a seasonal festival inspired by a real Swiss celebration that takes place in West Virginia towns, became one of the most beloved events in Fallout 76. Players joined parades, fought off waves of enemies, and collected masks as rewards. The event blended folklore, festivity, and absurdity in true Fallout style. Other events, like Meat Week or holiday themed activities, gave the wasteland bursts of life, creating traditions that players looked forward to each year. The perception of Fallout 76 slowly began to change, where once it was seen as a cautionary tale of overreach and broken promises, it started to gain a reputation as a comeback story. Reviews were updated to reflect improvements, and new players discovered a game far more complete than the one released in 2018. The obscurity here is that Fallout 76 may be one of the rare examples of a game that truly reinvented itself through persistence and updates, becoming closer to what it was always meant to be. By the time Steel Rain concluded, Appalachia had grown into a sprawling narrative filled with human drama, ideological conflict, and community spirit. What began as an empty map, populated only by robots and recordings, had become a living world once again. The journey from launch to these expansions reflects not just the resilience of the developers, but also of the players who stuck with the game. In a sense, Fallout 76 mirrors its own themes: rebuilding after disaster, forging community in chaos, and finding hope where there was once only ruin. The world of Fallout 76 is defined not just by its landscape or its vault dwellers, but also by the strange and terrifying creatures that roam across West Virginia's wasteland. From mutated wildlife that feels familiar to legendary cryptids pulled straight from Appalachian folklore, the game's bestiary is one of its most distinctive features. Many of these creatures carry obscure details, hidden spawns, and unique behaviors that make them memorable long after the first encounter. The most iconic of these new additions is the Mothman. Known from West Virginia folklore, the Mothman is a tall, winged figure with glowing red eyes. In the game, the Mothman does not behave like other hostile monsters. Sometimes it simply appears, watching the player from a distance, and then vanishes without attacking. Other versions of the Mothman, like the Wise Mothman, can even be encountered in special events, blessing players with experience boosts. This unusual behavior made it one of the most mysterious creatures in Fallout 76. Rather than being a simple enemy, it feels like a living piece of legend woven into the wasteland. The Grafton monster is another creature drawn from real Appalachian myth. Towering, muscular, and almost featureless except for its massive arms, it lumbers through areas near the town of Grafton. Unlike the elusive Mothman, the Grafton monster is openly hostile, charging players with brute strength. Its design captures the strange descriptions from mid 20th century newspaper reports that first popularized the legend. By giving this local cryptid a place in Fallout, Bethesda transformed regional folklore into a global phenomenon, turning a once obscure story into a staple of the series. The Flatwoods Monster also makes its Fallout debut here. Based on a famous UFO sighting from 1952 in West Virginia, the Flatwoods Monster is depicted as a glowing alien like being in a mechanical suit. In Fallout 76, it floats eerily above the ground, surrounded by green light, and can teleport to escape attacks. Its presence ties directly into Fallout's long running themes of alien conspiracies and government secrets. Encounters with the Flatwoods Monster are rare, adding to its aura of mystery. Many players consider spotting it one of the highlights of their explorations. Even more chilling is the Wendigo. Rooted in folklore that stretches beyond Appalachia, the Wendigo in Fallout 76 is a gaunt, skeletal creature with elongated limbs and a shrill scream. It embodies hunger and desperation, attacking with ferocity that unnerves even experienced players. Wendigo variants appear in special events and high-level zones, and their lore within the game suggests they may be humans mutated by starvation and exposure. This twisted origin makes them more horrifying because they feel like the logical extreme of survival gone wrong. Their design, all sharp claws and emaciated ribs, makes them stand out as some of the most disturbing enemies Bethesda has ever created. Beyond the cryptids, Fallout 76 also reintroduces classic creatures from the series, often with Appalachian twists. Deathclaws, long feared across the franchise, stalk remote corners of the map, including a notorious spawn near the White Spring Resort. Mirelurks, already creepy in Fallout 4, appear in new forms here, including the Mirelurk King and Queen. Radstags, two-headed deer, populate the forests, their haunting silhouettes adding to the eerie beauty of the wasteland. Even radroaches and mole rats return, offering familiar threats to players just emerging from Vault 76. One obscure detail is that many of these creatures are tied to specific regions of the map, reinforcing the sense of biome diversity. Wendigos are more likely to appear in eerie underground areas or abandoned mines. The Grafton monster is tied to the Toxic Valley and its industrial ruins. The Mothman appears most often near Point Pleasant, directly connecting to the real-world legend's origin. By anchoring monsters to their folklore homes, Bethesda made Appalachia feel like a living mythological landscape. Special events often highlight these creatures in creative ways. The Mothman Equinox event allows players to summon the Wise Mothman by performing rituals in Point Pleasant. Fastnacht parades, inspired by real Swiss traditions carried into West Virginia towns, often attract random spawns of cryptids and monsters. Meat Week, another community event, pits players against waves of wildlife while celebrating a barbecue-themed festival. These events add humor and absurdity to the wasteland, blending Appalachian charm with Fallout's dark comedy. Obscurities extend even into creature variants. There are glowing, diseased, and legendary versions of many monsters, each with enhanced abilities and unique loot. Legendary variants drop star-rated equipment, making them both feared and hunted. The glowing ones, irradiated ghouls that emit dangerous radiation fields, can turn an ordinary encounter into a desperate struggle. Diseased variants inflict debuffs like parasites or weakness, forcing players to adapt quickly. These subtle changes keep Appalachia unpredictable, rewarding players who pay attention to the details of their foes. Some creatures also carry environmental storytelling. In abandoned labs, players find notes about experiments that led to certain mutations. In mines, skeletal remains suggest failed encounters with wendigos. Near rivers and lakes, mirelurks leave evidence of nests and shells. Even Brahmin, the iconic two-headed cows, reflect the survival theme, wandering near player settlements and symbolizing the agricultural struggle to rebuild. These creatures are not only obstacles, they are threads of narrative woven into the land. Perhaps the most obscure aspect of Fallout 76's bestiary is how it reinforces the idea of Appalachia as different from any other wasteland. Previous Fallout games featured their own regional mutations geckos in Nevada, cazadores in New Vegas, Yaoguai in the Capital Wasteland. In 76, cryptids become Appalachia's signature. They connect the local culture of West Virginia to Fallout's alternate history, transforming roadside legends into tangible nightmares. This makes the game's creature design not only frightening, but culturally resonant. Together, these monsters define the mood of Fallout 76. The Mothman, the Grafton Monster, the Flatwoods Monster, and the Wendigo embody local myth. Deathclaws, radroaches, and mirelurks carry forward franchise tradition. Their placement across biomes, their behavior in events, and their role in community folklore make them more than just enemies. They are living symbols of Appalachia's past, present, and imagined future. Exploring the wasteland without encountering these legends would be impossible, because they are woven into the very identity of Fallout 76. One of the most defining features of Fallout 76 is the camp system, short for Construction and Assembly Mobile Platform. More than just a crafting feature, this system became the backbone of how players expressed themselves, survived, and left their mark on Appalachia. Its obscurities lie in the countless ways it allowed communities to form, stories to be told, and creativity to flourish in a land scarred by nuclear fire. The camp device is given to players early in their journey. Its lore explanation is simple. It is a piece of advanced Vault-Tec equipment designed to let dwellers establish a foothold anywhere on the surface. Unlike settlements in Fallout 4, which were tied to specific locations, camps in 76 could be placed almost anywhere. This flexibility turned Appalachia into a blank canvas, waiting for players to build homes, stores, art pieces, or even elaborate traps. At first, camps were basic: wooden shacks, simple crafting benches, and a few defenses were the standard starting point. But as players leveled up and unlocked plans, possibilities expanded dramatically. Blueprints for metal structures, concrete bunkers, neon signs, and decorative furniture turned bare wasteland hillsides into bustling communities. Some players built cozy cabins in the forest, others raised watchtowers in the Savage Divide, and a few constructed palaces overlooking the Cranberry Bog. The diversity of styles became an unspoken language, revealing personalities through architecture. One obscure detail in early development: camps were more limited, and Bethesda debated restricting placement to encourage commitment. But by launch, the system allowed players to freely move their camps. However, testing revealed this caused griefing, with other players deliberately building near resources or blocking paths. The final version allowed camps to be redeployed freely, saving blueprints so players could rebuild quickly. This decision completely changed the culture of the game, encouraging experimentation rather than permanence. Camps also became trading hubs, with vending machines added in the Wild Appalachia update in 2019. Players could stockpile goods and sell them to passers-by. Entire roadside markets emerged, with signs advertising sales, displays of rare armor, and camps themed around specific items. This economic layer transformed the social fabric of Fallout 76. Suddenly, a cabin in the woods could double as a general store, and a player in power armor could moonlight as a shopkeeper. The obscurity lies in how much this feature reshaped multiplayer interactions, making Appalachia feel like a living economy. Creativity extended beyond survival or profit. Some players used camps as art projects. They recreated famous landmarks, built roller coasters out of scaffolding, or staged eerie horror sets with mannequins and glowing lights. Others leaned into roleplay, designing taverns, sheriff stations, or raider outposts. Bethesda even began highlighting exceptional camps in community showcases, acknowledging how much personality they added to the game. In a way, the camp system became one of Fallout 76's greatest success stories, turning a broken launch into a platform for expression. Defenses also played a role in shaping camps. Turrets, traps, and guard posts allowed players to fend off wildlife and enemy attacks. Yet even here, obscurities emerged. Certain defenses were more effective in specific regions, while others created amusing chaos. Players sometimes used flamethrower traps not to protect themselves, but to stage dramatic entrances. Others intentionally built maze-like corridors filled with spikes, daring visitors to find their way through. These strange choices turned defense into performance, blurring survival and theater. Obscure mechanics tied to camps often went unnoticed by casual players. For instance, The size limit forced builders to be creative with space. Clever stacking of objects, careful use of foundations, and glitch building techniques allowed advanced players to stretch boundaries. Some discovered ways to place camps in unusual locations, such as cliffsides, bridges, or even inside hollow structures. These odd placements created entire subcultures of builders who sought the rarest or most dramatic spots in Appalachia. Camps also became places of rest and kindness in a harsh world. While Fallout 76 allowed PvP, many players chose to use their camps as safe havens. They built water purifiers, cooking stations, and stash boxes for anyone who passed by. Some even left free items in containers, offering supplies to newcomers struggling to survive. These gestures became part of the game's folklore, small acts of generosity that contrasted with the bleakness of the wasteland. Seasonal events often inspired camp themes. During Fastnacht, players decorated their bases with festival masks and streamers. During Meat Week, barbecues and outdoor kitchens appeared. Halloween brought haunted houses, with skeletons and glowing pumpkins arranged to scare visitors. These temporary decorations created a sense of shared celebration, turning Appalachia into a community space rather than just a battlefield. The camp system also highlighted the difference between Fallout 76 and its predecessors. In Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas, the world was static, built entirely by developers. Here, players reshaped the landscape daily. A hill that was empty one week might hold a castle the next. A roadside gas station could become a player's fortified headquarters. This fluidity made Appalachia unpredictable and alive, every login offering new sights created by human imagination. Obscurities even extend to camp blueprints. Some of the rarest plans can only be found in specific events or dropped by legendary enemies. This scarcity gave certain furniture or structures prestige. Owning a Nuka Cola vending machine or a Brotherhood of Steel banner signaled dedication and exploration. Players would often trade rare blueprints, turning them into currency as valuable as caps. This hidden economy of plans became another layer of the game, enriching the culture around building. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the camp system is how it turned survival into storytelling. A lonely cabin on a cliff might suggest a hermit trying to escape the chaos below. A sprawling fortress, bristling with defenses, might hint at paranoia or raider tendencies. A cheerful diner stocked with supplies could reflect optimism and generosity. These unspoken narratives gave Appalachia life beyond quests or combat. They made every encounter with another player's camp feel like stepping into a story written by someone else. In the end, the camp system became more than just a feature. It was a way for players to reclaim agency in a game that had struggled at launch. By building, decorating, defending, and sharing, they rebuilt not only Appalachia, but also the reputation of Fallout 76. The obscurities of camps, the hidden techniques, the strange art projects, the unexpected generosity are what make this system one of the most memorable in the series. Combat in Fallout 76 feels both familiar and strange. Many of the weapons and armor sets are drawn directly from earlier entries in the series, yet almost all of them carry new mechanics tied to crafting, modifications, and survival. Beneath the surface, the system is filled with obscure details that affect not only how battles play out, but also how players interact with each other and the world. The basic categories of weapons are what most players expect: pistols, rifles, shotguns, heavy guns, energy weapons, explosives, and melee tools. However, Fallout 76 introduced a heavier reliance on crafting and customization than ever before. Every weapon could be broken down into parts, and those parts could be reassembled with modifications. The obscurity here is that durability mattered. Weapons degraded with use, losing effectiveness until repaired. This created a constant cycle of scavenging, scrapping, and rebuilding, which became one of the central rhythms of the game. Obscure mechanics influence combat in subtle ways. Rifles could be turned into automatic or semi automatic versions, depending on mods. A hunting rifle, for instance, could start as a simple single shot weapon, but be rebuilt into a powerful sniper rifle with scopes and receivers. Pistols could be upgraded with suppressors, compensators, or faster firing rates. Even melee weapons carried surprising variety. A humble machete could be modified with serrated edges or weighted blades, transforming it from a survival tool into a deadly instrument. One of the most beloved mechanics among players was the legendary weapon system. Enemies marked as legendary dropped weapons or armor with special effects. These ranged from simple bonuses like increased damage to ghouls to bizarre perks like the two-shot effect, which fired an extra projectile with each trigger pull. Some legendary rolls became legendary in their own right, such as explosive shotguns or automatic rifles with armor-piercing effects. These drops created a culture of farming legendary enemies, searching endlessly for the perfect combination of traits. Power armor was another defining feature of combat. Fallout 76 allowed players to step into iconic suits like the T-45, T-51, T-60, and the X-1 series, alongside regional variants like the Excavator armor unique to Appalachia. Each suit provided not just immense protection, but also unique bonuses. The excavator armor, for example, increased the amount of ore gathered from mining, a nod to West Virginia's industrial history. This obscure bonus made it beloved among resource gatherers, blending lore with utility. Armor outside of power armor also carried hidden depth. Leather, metal, combat, and marine armor sets could be mixed and matched, with legendary variants offering unique effects. Players often discovered that lighter armor provided more mobility, while heavier sets offered raw defense. Some armor pieces had special perks, like reducing explosive damage or increasing stealth effectiveness. Over time, players developed builds tailored to their playstyles, from sneaky snipers to unstoppable tanks. Energy weapons in Fallout 76 held their own quirks. Laser rifles, plasma weapons, and gamma guns could be heavily modified, often requiring rare materials. Plasma weapons, in particular, stood out, since they could fire either bolts or streams, depending on the chosen barrel mod. The obscurity here lies in how differently these weapons behaved from their appearances. A plasma caster might look bulky and slow but deliver devastating bursts of damage, while a gamma gun inflicted radiation that bypassed conventional armor. These mechanics rewarded experimentation and discovery. Explosives also carried surprising variety. Fragmentation grenades, Molotov cocktails, and mines were staples, but players could also craft more unusual devices like plasma grenades or pulse mines. In group events, explosives often became the deciding factor, clearing waves of enemies quickly. Yet explosives carried risks too. Friendly fire could harm allies, and splash damage sometimes destroyed valuable loot or even parts of camp structures. This double edged nature made explosives powerful but unpredictable. Obscure quirks appeared in weapon balance. Bows, added later in updates, introduced an entirely different style of combat. They were silent, precise, and could be modified with explosive or flaming arrows. Though unconventional for Fallout, bows tied into Appalachian hunting culture, making them thematically fitting. Crossbows also returned, offering slow but high damage shots. Players who mastered these weapons often surprised others with their effectiveness, proving that obscurities could become strengths in the right hands. The crafting system tied everything together. Workbenches for weapons and armor allowed constant tinkering, but they also required resources scattered throughout Appalachia. Adhesive became infamous as one of the most valuable items, needed for nearly every repair and upgrade. Players scoured forests for plants to craft vegetable starch, which could be turned into adhesive, creating a quiet subculture of farming and cooking. The obscurity here is that one of the rarest resources in a game filled with radiation and death was simply glue. Perk cards further influenced combat in ways that were not always obvious. Instead of traditional perk trees, Fallout 76 introduced collectible cards that could be slotted and swapped. These cards offered bonuses like increased rifle damage, faster reload speeds, or stronger melee attacks. Some cards stacked in surprising ways, creating powerful synergies. The luck category, in particular, allowed legendary perks that made combat unpredictable, such as randomly repairing weapons mid battle. These mechanics meant that even players with the same weapons could fight very differently depending on their perk loadouts. Another obscure detail was how combat scaled in multiplayer. Enemies adapted to player levels, meaning that high level characters could fight alongside beginners without trivializing the challenge. This scaling often produced odd results, such as low level players seeing enemies with far less health than their allies did. While sometimes confusing, it allowed Appalachia to remain accessible to groups of friends, regardless of experience. Legendary armor introduced further complexity. Some pieces offered bonuses like regenerating health over time, reducing weight of carried ammo, or granting extra action points when sprinting. These traits encouraged mixing and matching rather than relying solely on complete sets. A player might wear two pieces of combat armor, one piece of marine armor, and a legendary chest plate, creating a patchwork suit tailored to personal needs. The obscurity is that no two builds were truly alike, giving endless variety to endgame combat. Even enemies themselves sometimes carried unique weapons. Scorched variants of humans wielded everything from hunting rifles to board weapons, often modded in unexpected ways. Defeating them could reward players with unusual versions of common arms. Super mutants continued their tradition of lugging heavy guns and melee clubs, while occasionally dropping rare legendary gear. The unpredictability of enemy loadouts kept combat dynamic, ensuring that even familiar foes might surprise players. Together, the weapon and armor systems of Fallout 76 created a combat environment that was less about finding one perfect tool and more about constant adaptation. Durability forced players to maintain their gear, crafting kept them scavenging, and legendary drops encouraged exploration. Power armor reinforced the iconic feel of Fallout, while perk cards and mods layered unpredictability into every fight. The obscurities of this system were not always visible at first glance, but they defined the long term experience, rewarding those who learned to master every bolt, barrel, and blade of Appalachia's arsenal. The wasteland of Appalachia would feel hollow without its factions. Even before Bethesda added human non player characters in the Wastelanders update, The game's earliest storylines leaned on groups whose history was told through holotapes, terminals, and ruins scattered across the map. These factions became the backbone of Appalachia's identity, each representing a different vision of survival. When Wastelanders arrived, some of these groups returned as living presences, while others remained ghosts, remembered only through records and relics. The first and perhaps most beloved of these early factions were the Responders. This group was born from ordinary people, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and volunteers who banded together after the bombs fell. They represented compassion and order, trying to rebuild society with emergency training and charity rather than force. Their headquarters in Morgantown, Charleston, and other towns tell their story in layers of detail. Training halls with posters and lesson plans reveal how they taught new survivors to cook, craft, and defend themselves. Even after they were wiped out by the scorched plague, their presence remained through quests and structures. The obscurity of the responders is that they embody the idealism of rebuilding, a grassroots group that died out but left a hopeful legacy for others to follow. Another early faction tied deeply to lore is the Free States. This group was made up of pre-war survivalists and doomsday preppers who rejected federal authority. They built bunkers throughout the Mire and other regions, preparing for catastrophe long before the bombs fell. Their obsession with independence made them outsiders, distrusted by many, yet their foresight saved lives. Notes and terminals scattered in their bunkers reveal paranoia, secret radio communications, and stockpiles of supplies. The obscurity of the Free States lies in their duality. They are both admirable for their preparation and tragic for their isolation. Many of their bunkers are abandoned by the time the player explores them, echoing the futility of trying to survive alone in a collapsing world. The Enclave also cast its shadow over Appalachia in Fallout 76. Remnants of this authoritarian government faction hid in the White Spring bunker, operating in secret. Their presence connects Appalachia to the larger Fallout universe, since the Enclave is one of the most infamous groups in the series. Players who discover their headquarters can access advanced technology, including nuclear codes that allow the launching of warheads. This mechanic ties directly into one of the most obscure aspects of Fallout. 76 player launched nukes that reshape the map temporarily, flooding zones with high-level enemies and rare resources. The Enclave's presence thus becomes both lore and gameplay, reinforcing their theme of using overwhelming force without care for the consequences. The Brotherhood of Steel also eventually made its way to Appalachia through the Steel Dawn and Steel Rain updates. Their arrival came long before the events of Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, making it one of the earliest chapters in the Brotherhood's timeline. In 76, they appear divided, with leaders like Paladin Ramani clashing with traditionalists like Night Shin. This internal conflict reflects the Brotherhood's long-running tension between protecting humanity and hoarding technology. The obscurity here is that Appalachia shows the Brotherhood not as a monolithic order, but as a fractured group trying to define itself in a chaotic world. Raiders and settlers became central after Wastelanders. The Raiders, based at Crater, occupy the ruins of a crashed space station. Their culture is violent, but also layered with pragmatism. They fight because they see no other way to survive. Settlers, based at Foundation, represent the opposite philosophy, seeking to rebuild through cooperation, farming, and trade. The conflict between these groups mirrors the broader theme of Fallout 76, whether survival is achieved through unity or aggression. Players who choose sides shape their experience, though both groups remain flawed. Raiders may be brutal, but they are honest about it, while settlers can be idealistic to the point of naivety. Obscure notes and recordings also reveal minor factions that most players overlook. The Gourmands, a group of raiders who resorted to cannibalism, left behind gruesome traces in their camps. The Diehards, another raider offshoot, tried to hold on to a moral code, refusing to kill innocents. These small splinter groups show how even raiders are not uniform, but fractured communities with competing values. The obscurity here lies in the diversity of raider culture, which is often portrayed as a single block in other Fallout titles. Another faction is the Blood Eagles, added in later updates. They are a brutal gang that worships violence and chaos, their camps decorated with grotesque imagery and mutilated corpses. Their presence adds new layers of danger to Appalachia, contrasting with the more pragmatic raiders of Crater. They embody cruelty for its own sake, a reminder that not all survivors choose ideology or cooperation, some simply embrace destruction. The cult of the Mothman is yet another fascinating addition. Scattered in Appalachia are shrines where robed cultists gather to worship the winged cryptid. These cultists pray, chant, and sometimes attack intruders. Their existence ties directly into West Virginia folklore while giving Fallout 76 a supernatural edge. For players who stumble upon them unexpectedly, the sight of robed figures bowing to statues of the Mothman is both eerie and memorable. What makes the factions of Appalachia obscure and unique is how much of their story is told indirectly. Before human NPCs were introduced, their legacies were scattered in abandoned bunkers, ruined headquarters, and fading radio signals. Even after updates, much of their presence still relies on environmental storytelling. The charred remains of a responder's camp, the echo of a Free States broadcast, the eerie murals of the Mothman cult. All of these tell stories that feel lived in and haunting. Together, these groups make Appalachia feel alive in ways both subtle and direct. They represent hope, paranoia, tyranny, chaos, and faith. They fight, they fracture, and they leave behind relics for players to piece together. The responders and free states remind us of humanity's desperate attempts to organize. The Enclave and Brotherhood of Steel tie Appalachia to larger themes of power and control. Raiders, settlers, and Blood Eagles show the messy spectrum of survival philosophies, and the cult of the Mothman adds a layer of superstition that feels as old as the mountains themselves. The factions of Fallout 76 are not just enemies or allies, they are storytellers shaping Appalachia's culture long after their members are gone. Their obscurities live in tapes, murals, bunkers, and camps, waiting for anyone willing to stop and listen. Currency has always been a strange part of the Fallout series. In most games, bottle caps have served as the standard for trade, a symbol of scarcity turned into value. Fallout 76 carries that tradition, but it also layers on multiple other forms of economy. The result is a complex web of caps, scrip, bullion, plans, and even player vending systems. Beneath the surface lies a story of scarcity, inflation, and creativity, an economy shaped as much by the community as by the developers. Caps remain the foundation. They are used to buy supplies, pay fast travel costs, and trade with NPCs. In Appalachia, the lore explanation is simple. Caps were chosen by survivors because they were universally available and difficult to counterfeit. But the obscurity comes from how limited caps can feel. Players quickly reach a daily cap earning limit, a mechanic Bethesda introduced to control inflation and balance the economy. At first, this confused many players who were accustomed to hoarding wealth. Over time, it became clear that the cap limit forced careful planning rather than reckless grinding. Then came scrip, a special form of currency used for trading legendary items. This system was introduced alongside legendary vendor machines, which allowed players to exchange unwanted legendary gear for scrip, and then spend that scrip on random rolls of new legendary gear. This mechanic turned loot into a form of gambling, with players trading piles of gear in hopes of finally unlocking the perfect combination of perks. The obscurity of this system is that it mirrors real world economies where recycling and chance dictate value, turning unwanted weapons into lottery tickets for better ones. Gold bullion added another layer. Introduced with the Wastelanders update, bullion became the key currency for endgame gear. It could be earned by completing daily quests, events, and exchanging treasury notes. With bullion, players could buy plans for some of the most powerful weapons and armor in the game, as well as camp items and cosmetics. The obscurity here lies in the way bullion was capped. Players could only earn so much per day and per week. This created a long term grind, encouraging consistent play rather than short bursts of farming. It also reinforced the idea that rebuilding civilization would not happen overnight. Alongside these official currencies, Fallout 76 fostered informal economies among players. When vending machines were introduced, players began selling items to each other using caps. Suddenly, Appalachia had shops scattered across the landscape, each one reflecting its owner's goals. Some players specialized in selling ammunition, others in rare plans, and a few in bulk crafting materials. Signs and neon lights advertised these stores, and word of mouth spread across forums about which players had the best deals. The obscurity of this player driven economy is that it transformed a survival game into a kind of post apocalyptic flea market, alive with trade and community. Plans themselves became a currency, since many camp items, weapons, and armor mods could only be built if a player owned the corresponding plan. These blueprints became highly sought after. Rare plans, such as those for fancy lights or powerful weapons, carried immense value. Players would trade plans like collectors, trading cards, often bartering rather than using caps. This hidden economy of paper blueprints became just as important as caps or bullion, proving that knowledge in Appalachia was as valuable as currency. Another layer of economy came from crafting materials. Adhesive, screws, aluminum, and other basic components were always in demand. Even high level players found themselves short on these items since every repair and modification consumed them. Informally, these materials became part of the barter system. Some players would give away legendary weapons in exchange for stacks of screws or circuitry. This obscurity highlights how Fallout 76 turned scrap into treasure, elevating mundane junk into valuable currency. Events also influenced the economy. Fastnacht, for instance, dropped masks that quickly became collector's items. Some masks were common, but others were extremely rare, and players began trading them like luxury goods. Owning one of the rarest Fastnacht masks became a status symbol, with some players pricing them at thousands of caps. Similarly, Meat Week rewarded special recipes and items, which circulated as limited commodities. These seasonal fluctuations mirrored real economies, where rarity and demand shaped value beyond simple function. Nukes reshaped the economy in even stranger ways. When players launched nuclear warheads on specific regions, high level enemies spawned, dropping rare materials and legendary loot. These nuke zones became hotspots for farming, and groups of players coordinated runs to maximize efficiency. Over time, the market flooded with certain legendary items, but scarcity remained for others. The obscurity of this mechanic is that it turned destruction into commerce, making nuclear war not just a spectacle, but a source of wealth. Another obscure detail is how Bethesda tried to stabilize the economy by adjusting drop rates and vendor prices. At various points, certain items became too common or too scarce, throwing the system off balance. The developers quietly tweaked numbers behind the scenes, but players often noticed and debated the changes. Entire threads were dedicated to speculating about supply and demand in Appalachia, showing how invested the community became in the survival of their own economy. Even ammo had its own economy. While basic rounds like 10mm bullets were plentiful, rarer types such as ultrasight ammo required specific crafting and resources. Players often traded ammo in bulk, and some camps became famous as ammunition depots. With vending machines, ammo became one of the most consistent sellers since everyone needed it and few wanted to farm it endlessly. The obscurity here lies in how a simple resource like bullets could create entire communities of crafters and suppliers. By combining caps, scrip, bullion, plans, materials, and even seasonal collectibles, Fallout 76 developed one of the most complex economies in the series. Unlike earlier games, where players hoarded wealth without limits, Appalachia forced survivors to balance multiple currencies, trade creatively, and adapt to scarcity. This economic web became part of the story itself. Survival was not only about fighting monsters or exploring ruins, it was about bartering masks, scrapping weapons, and stretching every last cap. In the end, the economy of Fallout 76 reflects both the harshness of the wasteland and the ingenuity of its players. Official currencies structured progress, while informal systems created culture. Together, they formed a world where survival was not only measured in bullets and blood, but also in glue, paper blueprints, and masks worn during parades. Appalachia's economy became one of its greatest obscurities, a hidden system that told the story of how humans rebuild not just society, but also trade, even at the end of the world. One of the most unexpected joys of Fallout 76 is its use of community events and seasonal activities. While the game's early days were marked by emptiness and controversy, these events slowly built a rhythm of tradition in Appalachia. They offered not just rewards, but a sense of culture, creating holidays and rituals that players looked forward to. Over time, these events became part of the very identity of Fallout 76, with their obscurities shaping both gameplay and community spirit. The most famous of these events is Fasnacht, inspired by a real Swiss celebration that is still observed in Helvetia, West Virginia today. In Fallout 76, Fasnacht takes place in the town of Helvetia, where robots guide players through festival preparations. Participants must gather supplies, decorate, and protect marchers during a parade. The event ends with a colorful celebration, and lucky players earn masks as rewards. The masks quickly became iconic, with some rarer versions selling for thousands of caps in player markets. The obscurity of Fastnacht is that it blends real world tradition with post apocalyptic absurdity, turning a quaint folk festival into one of the most beloved rituals of the wasteland. Meat Week is another fan favorite, centered around a super mutant named Grom and his companion Chally the Moo Moo. The event tasks players with preparing feasts, defending barbecues, and celebrating the joy of cooking in the wasteland. Grom himself is one of the game's quirkiest characters, a friendly trader who wanders the map outside of Meat Week. When the event begins, his cheerful voice and odd activities bring levity to Appalachia. Players roast meat, stir stew pots, and play instruments, all while fending off waves of enemies. The obscurity of Meat Week is that it captures the strange optimism of Fallout. Even in a world of ruin, survivors find time for barbecue and laughter. Seasonal events extend to the holidays. Halloween brings Spooky Scorched, enemies dressed in costumes who drop themed loot like pumpkin decorations. Christmas transforms Appalachia with Festive Scorched, carrying holiday gifts, which can be unwrapped for random items. These playful touches remind players that Fallout 76 is not only about survival but also about whimsy, where skeleton decorations and glowing jack-o'-lanterns sit alongside nuclear ruins. The obscurity here is that these events often encourage exploration, as players must search the world for costumed or gift carrying enemies rather than gathering in one spot. Scorched hunts are another recurring event. The Scorched, mutated humans who serve as one of the game's main enemy factions, sometimes appear in special forms, such as the Scorched Beast Queen. This towering bat like monster is one of the most challenging encounters in Fallout 76, requiring dozens of players to bring her down. The battle is chaotic, filled with explosions, energy blasts, and swarms of scorched minions. Defeating her yields rare loot, making the event both a test of skill and a treasure hunt. The obscurity of these battles is that they often feel like community milestones, with strangers joining forces spontaneously to tackle the wasteland's most terrifying beast. Beyond the headline events, smaller activities fill Appalachia with life. Rad Rumble, for example, tasks players with defending miners as they extract resources from a radioactive cavern. Line in the Sand requires defending a sonic emitter against waves of scorched. Eviction. Notice challenges players to clear out waves of super mutants from a makeshift camp. Each of these public events adds a burst of chaos and rewards, encouraging players to cooperate rather than wander alone. The obscurity here lies in the sheer variety, with dozens of events scattered across the map, many of which new players stumble into without realizing their scope. Some events are deeply tied to lore. The Mothman Equinox allows players to summon the Wise Mothman by completing rituals in Point Pleasant. Robed cultists gather, strange chants fill the air, and players defend altars against waves of enemies. The reward is often an encounter with the Wise Mothman, who blesses survivors with experience boosts. This event feels eerie, blurring the line between folklore and gameplay, and it ties Appalachia's mythos directly into the seasonal cycle. Another obscure event is Project Paradise, located in the Arctos Pharma facility. This activity tasks players with feeding animals in separate labs, then releasing them to fight waves of robots. The outcome depends on how well the animals are cared for, with stronger creatures providing better rewards. The obscurity of this event is that it emphasizes preparation and coordination rather than sheer firepower. Feeding the creatures requires teamwork, and the battles that follow reflect how much effort was invested in the early stages. Even daily ops and expeditions became part of this seasonal culture. Daily ops challenge players to clear out randomly generated dungeons with modifiers like cloaked enemies or double damage, rewarding rare resources. Expeditions, added later, allow players to leave Appalachia and travel to the Pit, a ruined industrial region first seen in Fallout 3. These activities function like recurring rituals, giving players something fresh to return to every day or week. The obscurity here is that while they seem routine, they keep Appalachia alive by creating shared goals across the community. Community created traditions also shape the culture. Some players gather at specific landmarks to celebrate milestones like leveling up or anniversaries. Others host impromptu parades or concerts using instruments found in the game. On forums and social media, survivors share camp designs themed after events like haunted houses for Halloween or diners decorated for Meat Week. These grassroots celebrations turn Appalachia into more than a game space. They transform it into a stage for creativity. What ties all these events together is their ability to turn Fallout 76 into a living world. Where launch content felt barren, festivals and activities filled the gaps with joy, humor, and challenge. Fastnacht turned Helvetia into a symbol of survival and tradition. Meat Week gave players a reason to celebrate with a friendly super mutant chef. Holiday events sprinkled Appalachia with cheer, and massive battles like the Scorched Beast Queen reminded players of the scale of the threats they face together. The obscurity of Appalachia's events is that they make survival feel cyclical. Just as seasons change in the real world, so too does the wasteland transform with its festivals. One week may bring parades of robots and masks, another may bring feasts with Grom, and another may summon eldritch cryptids in cultist rituals. These rhythms encourage players to return, not only for loot, but for the sense of belonging in a shared, quirky culture. In the end, the festivals of Fallout 76 prove that even in a broken world, survivors invent reasons to gather, celebrate, and create. Appalachia is more than ruins and monsters. It is a community with traditions, some strange, some joyful, all deeply human. The world of Fallout 76 is built upon a reimagined version of West Virginia, transformed by nuclear fire, yet still recognizable through its mountains, rivers, and towns. What sets Appalachia apart from other Fallout regions is its diversity. Rather than one bleak wasteland, the map is divided into distinct zones, each with its own atmosphere, dangers, and obscure stories. Wandering from one biome to the next feels like stepping through entirely different worlds, stitched together under the same ruined sky. The forest is where most journeys begin. It is lush, colorful, and deceptively welcoming. Rolling hills, autumn trees, and small towns like Flatwoods and Sutton create a sense of familiarity, almost as if the world had not ended. Yet beneath this beauty are reminders of collapse. Churches filled with the dead, farms overtaken by radstags, and rivers poisoned by runoff show how fragile the peace truly island. The forest hides some of Appalachia's earliest stories, including the remnants of the responders who once trained survivors in Flatwoods. The obscurity of the forest is its dual nature, both a place of hope and a graveyard of failed beginnings. Moving north leads to the Toxic Valley, where the landscape shifts dramatically. Once home to factories and heavy industry, the area is now a polluted wasteland coated in white ash and chemical residue. The town of Grafton sits at its center, watched over by the bizarre Grafton monster that stalks its streets. The Toxic Valley is bleak and unsettling, with its lakes turned gray and its air filled with haze. The obscurity of this region is its reminder of how human industry, not just nuclear war, poisoned Appalachia long before the bombs fell. To the east lies the mire, a swampy region filled with strange flora and treacherous terrain. Mutated insects swarm the area, and twisted trees rise above murky waters. The mire is home to the remnants of the Free States, survivalists who built bunkers in anticipation of nuclear war. Exploring their underground shelters reveals paranoia, secret communications, and stockpiles of weapons. The mire is both haunting and fascinating, with its strange mix of decay and hidden preparation. Its obscurity lies in how it represents both foresight and futility. The Free State survived the bombs, but not the chaos that followed. The Savage Divide splits Appalachia in half with its mountain range. Rocky cliffs, high plateaus, and treacherous passes dominate this zone. It is home to raider camps, military installations, and dangerous wildlife. At higher elevations, snow begins to blanket the land, creating eerie contrasts between icy peaks and the scorched valleys below. The Savage Divide is also where many of Appalachia's most obscure secrets hide, from crashed satellites to hidden bunkers. It embodies the harshness of survival, a literal divide that mirrors the philosophical divides among the factions scattered across the map. To the far south lies the Cranberry Bog, one of the most dangerous regions in Fallout 76. Its ground is coated in deep red vegetation, giving it an almost alien appearance. Mutated creatures prowl the bog, and scorched threats dominate the landscape. The eerie coloration comes from mutated cranberries, a bizarre twist that gives the land both beauty and menace. At its heart stands Watoga, a pre war automated city that once promised technological utopia. By the time players arrive, its robots patrol endlessly, malfunctioning and hostile. The obscurity of the Cranberry Bog is that it represents both the promise and failure of pre war progress, a city that was meant to be perfect but became a nightmare of steel and radiation. Ash Heap, found in the southwest, is another striking zone. Once the center of mining operations, it is now buried under soot and fire. Machinery still grinds in the distance, and sulfur vents belch smoke into the air. This region tells the story of Appalachia's reliance on coal and the workers who lived and died by it. The excavation sites are haunted by mutated mole miners, twisted humans who once worked the mines and now dig obsessively without purpose. The obscurity of Ash Heap is its reflection of labor's cost, where industry scarred the earth and left only ash behind. The divide between these regions makes exploration memorable. Unlike other Fallout maps that present wasteland as one endless stretch, Appalachia feels alive with change. One moment a player may be walking through golden forests, the next climbing snowy ridges, and then descending into crimson swamps. This diversity keeps the world fresh, but it also ties directly into West Virginia's real geography. Bethesda studied maps, legends, and landmarks, weaving them into a post-nuclear vision. The obscurity here lies in how much real detail survives under the radiation, a shadow of the state that inspired it. Appalachia's landmarks also carry their own obscure stories. The New River Gorge Bridge, faithfully recreated, stretches across a massive chasm, reminding players of both engineering triumphs and the fragility of human effort. Camden Park, a roadside amusement park, still houses broken rides and faded mascots. The White Spring Resort, once a luxury hotel, now stands as a fortified stronghold tied to the enclave. These locations are not just set dressing, but pieces of narrative, each telling a fragment of pre-war and post-war life. Obscure details hide in the ruins of towns. Charleston, once the capital, lies in devastation, its government buildings filled with clues about the failed attempts to maintain order after the bombs. Harper's Ferry, a site of real historical importance, becomes a battleground between super mutants and other factions. Point Pleasant, birthplace of the Mothman legend, serves as a shrine to the cryptid, with cultists leaving offerings at statues. Each of these towns bridges reality and Fallout's alternate history, creating a blend of the familiar and the uncanny. Even the rivers and mountains tell stories. The Ohio River glimmers on the edge of the map, a reminder of the borders beyond Appalachia. The rolling hills of the Savage Divide echo the Appalachian Trail, twisted now into treacherous paths patrolled by raiders. Cranberry Bog's scarlet vegetation contrasts sharply with the serene waters of the forest, creating natural storytelling through color alone. The land itself becomes a character, shifting in mood from hopeful to horrifying. Together, these regions and landmarks define Appalachia. They are not just places to fight or loot, but settings rich with identity. The forest is home and memory, the toxic valley is pollution and decay, the mire is paranoia and preparation, the savage divide is danger and division, the ash heap is labor and sacrifice, and the cranberry bog is beauty and menace. Each zone tells its own story while connecting to the larger narrative of survival. The obscurity of Appalachia is that it mirrors reality. West Virginia's history of coal mining, folklore, and isolated communities echoes in its post apocalyptic counterpart. By exploring these landmarks, players do more than survive. They uncover the cultural and environmental history of a state reshaped by bombs, but still recognizable through its bones. Appalachia is not just a backdrop, it is the heart of Fallout 76, alive with secrets waiting to be found. The heart of any Fallout game lies not just in exploration or combat, but in the quests that give meaning to the ruins. Fallout 76 approaches this differently from earlier entries, beginning without human non player characters and leaning on holotapes, terminals, and environmental storytelling. Later updates reintroduced living characters, weaving new arcs into the existing framework. The result is a tapestry of quests, both grand and small, filled with obscure details that reward careful attention. The main quest line at launch revolved around the Scorched Plague, a terrifying disease that turned humans into the feral Scorched. These enemies were more than just ghouls, they retained some intelligence, wielded weapons, and fought with disturbing coordination. Lore revealed that the plague spread through spores released by the scorch beasts, mutated bat like monsters whose presence devastated Appalachia. Players who followed the Overseer's path uncovered research stations, scattered notes, and medical experiments, slowly piecing together the scale of the threat. The obscurity here is that this disease was unique to Appalachia, representing a regional horror that tied directly into the new monsters. The Overseer herself served as a guiding figure. Through logs and recordings, she urged Vault Dwellers to understand the world and confront its dangers. Though she was not physically present at launch, her story anchored the player's journey. Later updates brought her back as a living character, allowing players to finally interact with her directly. This evolution from absence to presence mirrored the game itself, beginning empty and gradually filling with life. The Overseer's story also highlighted moral choices, whether to preserve old traditions, embrace new ones, or make compromises for survival. Smaller side quests, scattered across Appalachia, reveal even more obscure tales. At Camden Park, for example, A faded amusement park run by robots, players can complete silly tasks like cleaning up trash or serving food to visitors who no longer exist. These quests carry both humor and melancholy as machines go through the motions of a festival long gone. The obscurity here is that they reflect how the world clings to routines even after meaning has vanished. Charleston, once a hub of government, offers quests tied to the remnants of political leaders who tried to restore order after the bombs. Logs and notes reveal corruption, desperation, and eventual collapse. Following these trails shows how human ambition crumbled in the face of overwhelming disaster. Similarly, quests tied to the responders let players step into the shoes of volunteer rescuers, retracing their training courses and emergency protocols. Each of these tasks reinforces the idea that Appalachia was filled with people who tried and failed to rebuild. Some quests tied directly to real West Virginia folklore. At Point Pleasant, players uncover the cult of the Mothman, performing rituals and uncovering their beliefs. At Harper's Ferry, a site of historical rebellion, quests reveal the town's transformation into a battleground between super mutants and human survivors. These stories connect Fallout's alternate history to real events and myths, blurring the line between legend and wasteland reality. The obscurity lies in how deeply Bethesda wove local culture into the fabric of quests, turning folklore into living content. The Enclave questline is one of the most obscure and impactful. Hidden beneath the White Spring Resort is a vast bunker controlled by remnants of the Enclave. By following radio signals and piecing together clues, players gain access to advanced technology and eventually unlock the ability to launch nuclear strikes. This mechanic, tied directly to the lore of America's shadow government, transforms players into wielders of apocalyptic power. The obscurity is that this questline makes Appalachia one of the few places where players can personally trigger nuclear devastation, reshaping the map in real time. With the arrival of Wastelanders, questlines grew richer. The factions of settlers and raiders brought branching storylines, moral dilemmas, and companions. Choosing sides revealed new layers of Appalachia's society, and obscure dialogue options showed how these groups mirrored both idealism and brutality. The Brotherhood of Steel quest lines in Steel Dawn and Steel Rain further deepened the narrative, forcing players to navigate ideological conflicts within the Order itself. These quests tied Appalachia to the wider Fallout universe, while still giving it a unique identity. Obscure quests also hide in the corners of the map. In lonely cabins, players might find letters between family members separated by the bombs. In abandoned camps, notes reveal doomed expeditions, desperate last stands, or quiet tragedies. One quest at the Tyler County Fairgrounds has players interacting with malfunctioning carnival robots, a story that blends dark humor with melancholy. Another at the Pumpkin House lets players uncover the story of its eccentric owner, who decorated his home obsessively before the end. These small tales give Appalachia texture, making it feel lived in even after death. Daily and repeatable quests add another layer of obscurity. Some involve defending settlements from attacks, while others require delivering supplies or clearing infestations. Though often simple, they reinforce the theme of rebuilding, as survivors must constantly perform maintenance to keep society afloat. The obscurity here is that these repetitive tasks mirror real survival. Rebuilding is not a single grand act, but countless small labors repeated endlessly. Even the Scorched Beast Queen event ties back into the main quest line, Summoning her through a nuclear strike not only creates an epic battle, but also advances the lore of the Scorched Plague. Defeating her is both a gameplay challenge and a narrative milestone, symbolizing the fight to contain Appalachia's greatest threat. The obscurity is that while many see the Queen as a loot farm, her presence is actually the culmination of the Overseer's warnings and research, making her one of the most significant enemies in Fallout history. Together, these quests and hidden stories form the spine of Fallout 76. They range from epic battles against plagues and shadow governments to quiet notes left in ruined houses. They connect Appalachia to the larger Fallout universe while grounding it in local culture and folklore. The obscurity lies in their presentation. Many are easy to miss, scattered across terminals or buried in tapes. Only those who take the time to explore slowly uncover the full weight of Appalachia's history. In the end, Fallout 76's quests prove that even in a multiplayer experiment, storytelling remains at the core of Fallout. The Scorched Plague, the Overseer's Journey, the factions, and the smaller human tragedies all remind players that survival is not just about fighting monsters, but about remembering those who came before. Appalachia's quests are its heartbeat, obscure and haunting, echoing across mountains and valleys for anyone willing to listen. Nuclear weapons have always loomed large over the Fallout series. They are the catastrophe that shaped the wasteland, the ultimate symbol of destruction, and occasionally a weapon in the hands of players. In Fallout 76, nuclear arms take on a more direct role than ever before. They are not just part of the past, but an ongoing mechanic, woven into both lore and gameplay. This unique system adds a layer of obscurity to Appalachia, where players can summon fire from the sky and reshape the land in real time. The ability to launch a nuke begins with the Enclave. Hidden beneath the White Spring Resort is their sprawling bunker, filled with terminals, advanced defenses, and remnants of America's shadow government. By progressing through their questline, players gain access to nuclear codes and launch sites. This process is not simple. Players must first hunt down code fragments scattered across Appalachia, then piece them together into full keys. Along the way, they fight through fortified silos guarded by robots and turrets. The obscurity here is that the act of launching a nuke mirrors the bureaucratic and military obsession of the pre-war world, where paperwork and protocol mattered as much as the devastation itself. Once a nuke is launched, Appalachia changes. The blast zone becomes a scorched and irradiated wasteland, glowing with radiation and crawling with high-level enemies. The most notorious of these is the Scorched Beast Queen, an enormous bat-like monster that serves as one of the ultimate challenges in the game. The Queen's roar shakes the battlefield, her wings darken the sky, and waves of scorched minions pour in to support her. Defeating her requires coordination, firepower, and persistence. For many players, their first successful Queen battle is a rite of passage, but the obscurity of nuclear strikes lies not just in the monsters they summon, but in how they reshape the land. Vegetation turns black, buildings are scarred, and irradiated resources appear in abundance. Rare crafting materials like flux can only be harvested from these temporary zones. This makes nukes both a weapon and a tool, used as much for farming as for combat. Groups of players coordinate strikes on specific regions, farming the resulting materials to craft high-level gear. In this way, nuclear devastation becomes part of survival, a paradox where destruction fuels creation. Launching a nuke also carries social meaning. When the sky darkens and the sirens blare, the entire server is alerted. A marker appears on the map, showing where the bomb will land. Players rush toward or away from the blast zone, depending on their goals. Sometimes, strangers form impromptu alliances, gathering at the edge of the crater to fight together. Other times, players launch nukes simply to cause chaos, dropping them on popular farming spots or event locations. The obscurity here is that nuclear strikes create spontaneous social experiments, forcing cooperation or conflict in unpredictable ways. The silos themselves carry hidden stories. As players explore them, they uncover logs from the pre war military, revealing the obsessive maintenance and paranoia that surrounded America's nuclear arsenal. Robots chatter endlessly about protocol, systems glitch under strain, and terminals describe endless drills. These details highlight how much of the old world's identity revolved around nuclear readiness. The silos feel less like bunkers of safety and more like temples of destruction, built to maintain power at any cost. Another obscure detail lies in the very concept of nukes as endgame content. In earlier Fallout titles, nuclear weapons were often narrative choices, with players deciding whether to detonate bombs like the one in Megaton or unleash mass destruction elsewhere. In 76, they are mechanical systems, repeatable and farmable. This shift reframes nukes not as singular moral dilemmas, but as everyday tools of survival. It is both unsettling and fascinating, reflecting how easily humanity can normalize even the most extreme weapons. The lore consequences of nuclear strikes extend further. Notes and logs suggest that scorch beasts were drawn to irradiated zones and that radiation encouraged their spread. Launching nukes, while necessary to summon the Scorched Beast Queen, also risks worsening the very conditions that allow them to thrive. This creates a dark cycle. Players must use nukes to summon the Scorched Beast Queen, but in doing so, they release more radiation that strengthens the conditions Scorch Beasts thrive in. The obscurity is that Appalachia's greatest weapon may also be its greatest curse. Nuclear strikes also highlight Appalachia's ties to the larger Fallout universe. The Enclave's control of the silos connects directly to their role in Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, where they obsessed over reclaiming America through overwhelming force. In 76, players inherit their power, becoming the new arbiters of destruction. This continuity reinforces Fallout's central theme that humanity never truly learns from its past, repeating cycles of devastation with new faces at the controls. For players, the thrill of a nuclear launch often becomes a story in itself. Coordinating with allies to gather code fragments, fighting through automated defenses, and finally watching the missile streak into the sky creates a moment of drama unlike any other. The countdown timer, the blaring alarms, the glow of the blast on the horizon, all of it feels both terrifying and exhilarating. Even after dozens of launches, the spectacle retains its weight, a reminder of what humanity unleashed upon itself. Yet, for all its grandeur, launching a nuke also reveals absurdity. Sometimes the blast kills players unprepared for the radiation. Other times, enemies glitch into walls or vanish mid battle. Farming runs devolve into chaotic scrambles for loot, with players tripping over each other amid explosions. These imperfections add humor to the horror, turning nuclear war into both tragedy and comedy in true Fallout fashion. In the end, the role of nuclear weapons in Fallout 76 captures the contradictions of the series. They are devastating yet necessary, terrifying yet routine, symbols of failure yet tools of survival. Their obscurities lie in how they reshape Appalachia's world, not just once, but again and again, as players repeat the cycle of destruction and rebirth. In Appalachia, fire from the sky is no longer just history. It is a choice, a ritual, and a reminder that humanity still holds the power to end itself. In Fallout 76, the wasteland speaks not only through its landscapes and quests, but also through its sound. Music and radio stations have always been iconic elements of the series, blending vintage tunes with post apocalyptic chaos. Appalachia carries that tradition forward, but also twists it in obscure ways that reflect both the emptiness of its early days and the vibrancy it later achieved. The soundscape of Fallout 76 is one of its most overlooked treasures, shaping the atmosphere of survival in subtle yet powerful ways. At launch, one of the most striking differences between Fallout 76 and its predecessors was the absence of familiar radio personalities. Fallout 3 had Three Dog, a charismatic voice narrating the wasteland's struggles. Fallout New Vegas had Mr. New Vegas, whose calm tones gave comfort across the Mojave. Even Fallout 4 had Travis and his awkward transformation into confidence. In Appalachia, however, there were no human DJs, only automated systems. This absence made the world feel lonelier, as if even the radios had lost their human spark. The obscurity here is that this silence was deliberate. Bethesda wanted the emptiness to mirror the lack of NPCs. Yet it also became one of the most criticized aspects of the game's launch. Despite this, Appalachia still offered a selection of radio stations. Appalachia Radio played an assortment of vintage songs, echoing the Americana tone of earlier games. Tracks like old country ballads, bluegrass melodies, and classic swing carried across the hills, grounding the wasteland in both Fallout's tradition and West Virginia's musical heritage. The obscurity of Appalachia Radio lies in its local flavor. While the series has always drawn from mid 20th century music, the choice of Appalachian folk songs made this entry uniquely tied to its setting. Classical radio also made a return, offering orchestral pieces that contrasted with the chaos outside. Listening to symphonies while wandering through ruined towns created a surreal sense of calm, reminding players of the cultural heights humanity once achieved. This juxtaposition of elegance and devastation has long been a Fallout hallmark, and in 76 it gained new resonance in the quiet, NPC free launch world. Without voices or news interruptions, classical tracks played endlessly, transforming into eerie background music for Appalachia's solitude. Obscure details extend to event specific music. Fastnacht, the annual festival, features jaunty tunes tied to its parade of robots and masks. Meat Week brings cheerful drum beats and Grom's off key singing, adding levity to Appalachia's grim survival. Holiday events layer in festive tracks, from jingle bells to eerie Halloween soundscapes. These seasonal sounds give Appalachia texture, reminding players that music is not static but living, changing with the community's calendar. Perhaps the most haunting use of sound in Fallout 76 lies in its environmental audio. The distant cries of scorch beasts echo across the cranberry bog, sending shivers down spines before the monsters even appear. Wind whistles through the savage divide, carrying with it the sense of emptiness at high elevation. In the mire, insect chirps and swamp noises create an unsettling backdrop, while the ash heap rumbles with machinery and sulfur vents. The obscurity of these soundscapes is that many players hardly notice them consciously, yet they define the mood of each region more than visuals alone. In Wastelanders and later updates, new voices finally arrived. Human NPCs brought conversations, dialogue, and radio chatter back into Appalachia. Suddenly, the silence gave way to words again. Factions broadcasted calls for help, traders offered deals, and companions shared their thoughts. These sounds restored a sense of humanity to the wasteland, transforming Appalachia from a graveyard of echoes into a land filled with voices once more. The game also added subtle uses of music tied to quests. Some holotapes play scratchy recordings of survivors singing or humming to themselves, adding personal touches to tragedy. Notes left behind sometimes reference favorite songs, hinting at lives defined by music even after the bombs. These small details create intimacy, reminding players that culture does not vanish overnight. Even in ruin, people still cling to melodies. Another obscure touch lies in the jukeboxes scattered across Appalachia. Found in diners, houses, or player built camps, these machines play snippets of music when activated. Some players decorate their bases with multiple jukeboxes, turning settlements into lively hangouts. Others leave them broken, letting silence tell its own story. The presence of these jukeboxes underscores Fallout's long running motif of music as memory, where a simple tune can evoke a vanished world. Voice acting in Fallout 76 also carries hidden depth. While launch featured no human NPCs, updates introduced dozens of voiced characters, each adding personality to Appalachia. Raider leaders barked orders, settler farmers spoke of crops, and Brotherhood members debated ideology. Some performances were straightforward, while others leaned into eccentric humor. The obscurity lies in how these voices reshaped Appalachia's tone. A land that once felt barren suddenly pulsed with argument, laughter, and confession, shifting the soundscape from ghost town to community. The role of silence should not be overlooked either. Fallout 76 uses quiet moments effectively, standing on a ridge at night, listening to the wind and the occasional howl of a creature creates a meditative atmosphere. The absence of constant dialogue or music allows the mind to wander, reinforcing the theme of solitude. These pauses are as important as any radio track, reminding players that the wasteland is as much about reflection as it is about survival. Obscure community traditions also emerged around music. Players sometimes gather in camps or towns and use in game instruments to perform together. Bands form spontaneously, with guitars, banjos, drums, and tubas filling the air. Bethesda even rewards this by granting buffs for playing music, encouraging survivors to turn art into survival. The obscurity here is that these jam sessions are rarely planned. They happen organically, proving that even in digital wastelands, people find joy in song. In the end, the sound of Fallout 76 is a story of evolution. It began with silence and loneliness, carried only by automated radio and environmental noise. Over time, it grew into a world of festivals, human voices, instruments, and community concerts. The obscurity of its music lies in the details: a holotape lullaby, a jukebox in a ruined diner, or a seasonal tune played by cheerful robots. Together, these sounds make Appalachia feel alive, not just through sight, but through song. While Fallout 76 is built on quests, monsters, and landscapes, its most obscure and fascinating element has always been the community. Appalachia was designed as a multiplayer world, and though its launch stumbled, players themselves filled the gaps, transforming an empty wasteland into a living experiment in survival and culture. The true story of Fallout 76 is not only in the lore, but in the ways people chose to interact through kindness, creativity, mischief, and persistence. From the beginning, players began role playing. In the absence of non player characters, some survivors set up shops using the camp system, welcoming wanderers with vending machines and decorated storefronts. Others played the part of raiders, setting traps and demanding tolls from anyone passing near their bases. A few even styled themselves as wasteland sheriffs, patrolling roads and protecting low level players from hostile wildlife. These self imposed roles turned Appalachia into a stage where the lines between game mechanics and storytelling blurred. Kindness became one of the defining traits of the community. Veterans often left stashes of food, water, and ammo in containers for new players. Some invited beginners to their camps, offering free crafting benches or guiding them through difficult quests. In online forums, countless stories circulated of strangers swooping in during desperate battles to lend aid, then vanishing without a word. These random acts of generosity became part of the folklore of Fallout 76, proving that even in a world designed around scarcity, cooperation could flourish. At the same time, mischief thrived. PvP systems allowed griefing, and some players delighted in finding ways to disrupt others. Early exploits let griefers crash servers or duplicate items, flooding the economy. Others camped popular farming zones, ambushing unsuspecting wanderers. Yet even these negative behaviors created culture. Entire threads and videos documented notorious troublemakers, turning them into legends of their own. The obscurity lies in how much these griefers shaped memory hated in the moment, but remembered as part of Appalachia's chaotic history. Community events further highlighted the human element. Fastnacht parades, meat week barbecues, and scorched hunts became places where strangers gathered, often without speaking, to complete tasks together. The sight of dozens of survivors marching alongside robots in Helvetia or roasting meat with Grom felt surreal yet heartwarming. These festivals created shared traditions where music, masks, and laughter briefly overpowered the bleakness of the wasteland. Many players began to log in specifically for these events, not only for rewards, but for the feeling of belonging. Roleplay extended into creativity beyond the game itself. Players shared screenshots of elaborate camps, from towering castles to eerie haunted houses. Others posted stories or videos about their in game personas, turning Appalachia into a narrative playground. Some organized wasteland weddings, fashion shows, or even news broadcasts. These obscure acts of imagination blurred the line between survival and performance, showing that Fallout 76 was as much about creativity as combat. The generosity of the community sometimes surprised even Bethesda. Developers highlighted exceptional camps or charitable acts in official showcases, acknowledging that the game's best stories often came from its players. During global crises, such as the early days of the pandemic, players even organized virtual gatherings in Appalachia to connect with others. In this sense, Fallout 76 became more than a game. It became a social space, a digital town square where survivors sought connection, yet the darker side of human nature also persisted. Item duplication, cheating, and toxic behavior sometimes plagued the community, sparking debates about fairness and balance. Bethesda struggled to contain these issues, often patching exploits after they had already warped the economy. Despite this, the community endured, adapting to each wave of disruption. The obscurity here lies in the resilience of the survivors, who managed to keep finding meaning in Appalachia even when chaos reigned. One of the most fascinating community traditions involves music. Players frequently gather with in game instruments, forming spontaneous bands. Guitars, banjos, drums, and tubas echo across camps, with buffs rewarding those who play. Sometimes strangers join in, creating impromptu concerts on mountain ridges or in ruined towns. These moments of harmony are rarely planned, yet they stand out as some of the most human experiences in Fallout 76. In a game built on destruction, people still chose to make music together. Another obscure detail lies in the trading culture. Rare items like Fasnacht masks or unique plans became symbols of status. Players often built reputations as reliable traders, known for fair deals or rare inventories. Some even ran businesses across servers, seeking out valuable blueprints to resell. This turned Appalachia into a thriving market, where word of mouth and trust mattered as much as caps. Community creativity also extended to charity. Some groups organized events where wealthier players donated items to beginners, staging giveaways with games and contests. These charity drives became part of Appalachia's culture, reminding players that survival could mean generosity as well as greed. Stories of these events spread widely, reinforcing the idea that the Fallout 76 community had a spirit of kindness unmatched in many online games. Over time, the community shaped the perception of Fallout 76 as much as Bethesda's updates did. Where launch reviews painted the game as broken and empty, player stories filled it with warmth, humor, and chaos. Articles and videos about player kindness, bizarre roleplay, or epic battles began to shift the narrative. The obscurity here is that Fallout 76 may be one of the few games redeemed not only by developer support, but also by the resilience of its community. In the end, the human element is what keeps Appalachia alive. The forest, the mire, the ash heap, and the cranberry bog are beautiful and haunting, but without people, they would be static. With players, they become dynamic, filled with laughter, betrayal, generosity, and creativity. Fallout 76 is as much about its community as it is about its monsters or quests. The obscurities of the human wasteland lie in countless untold stories. A beginner saved by a stranger, a raider roleplayer demanding caps at a bridge, a band of survivors gathering to play tubas under a blood-red sky. These moments, fleeting yet powerful, define Appalachia more than any scripted quest. Fallout 76 proves that even in a broken world, people will rebuild not only structures, but relationships. They will invent rituals, share resources, and create art. They will grieve, laugh, and persist. In this way, the true heart of Appalachia is not its monsters or factions, but its survivors, the real people behind the vault suits, carrying forward a story of resilience and imagination in the face of ruin.